I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 101 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, November 29th, 2022. The committee is resuming its studying of Canada's electricity grid and network. Since today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of all. Before we begin, I would like to ask all members and other in-person participants to consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. Please take note of the following preventative measures in place to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. Only use a black-approved earpiece. The former gray earpieces must no longer be used. Keep your earpiece away from all microphones at all times. When you're not using your earpiece, place it face down on the sticker placed on the table for this purpose. Thank you for your cooperation. Zoom reminders, please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Additionally, screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. In accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for the witnesses, I am informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of this meeting. I would now like to welcome our witnesses with us today from Capital Power.
Point of order?
Yes, Mr. Angus, on a point of order.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I don't want to interrupt our witnesses. I just want to get a clarity on the witnesses that we have for TMX for the next meeting. I understand there's that some of the witnesses aren't coming. Can you confirm whether or not they're unable to meet because it's a short deadline, or they are not wanting to come to our committee?
Thank you, Mr. Angus, and I'll just and I'll go to you right after Mr. Simard, and I'll just ask you to hold for a second. From what the clerk has advised me, Mr. Angus, they have indicated they would like to come, but at a future date. Because of the short notice, they're unable to make the meeting on Monday. Is that answers on a point of order? Monsieur Simard, on a point of order.
Oui, simplement.
Yes, in our motion, further to what Charlie has said, we indicated that we should hear from Thursday on the parliamentary budget officer. So this would be next Thursday. So if I'm to understand, we won't be hearing from the DPO. This will be pushed back to September, and I would like the committee to ask the parliamentary budget officer to provide us with an update on Trans Mountain. So we will be hearing from him in September. Therefore, he should be able to update the document that he has already tabled on Trans Mountain. So when he tabled his document, the PBO, we weren't talking about $30 billion. So I'd like the committee to ask for an update before he appears, which will probably take place in September.
Thank you, Mr. Simard. I don't see any objections to having an updated information from them for the meeting that may take place sometime in the future. You referenced possibly in September. So that's something we can do to do that unless anybody has an objection. I'm looking across. I don't see any objections to getting updated information at the appropriate time. Okay, thank you. Back to you, Mr. Angus.
Yes, peut-être c'est un petit problème.
Maybe a little problem. I didn't have access to the interpretation.
Mr. Angus, I had heard Mr. Simard through the interpretation. I believe Mr. Steinley has also indicated the same. You might be on the wrong channel, or you... No, it's okay. But were you clear with my response that was given to Mr. Simard's question? I think so. Everybody's clear with what I had stated? Okay. So we're good? No objections to me to proceed forward with our, okay. Wonderful, thank you. Okay, thank you to the witnesses for being patient. We'll now proceed with the witnesses for today from Capital Power. May Wong, Senior Vice President, Strategy, Planning and Sustainability by video conference. Daniel Georgiou, Vice President, Regulatory Sitting and Stakeholder Engagement by video conference. From Geothermal Canada, Catherine Hickson, President by video conference. From Greengate Power Corporation, Dan Balaban, Chief Executive Officer by video conference. From Western Copper and Gold, Paul West-Sells, President by video conference. You have up to 5 minutes for opening remarks, and after that, we will proceed with the round of questions. And I will be using these two cards, a yellow to give you a warning of 30 seconds, red that your time is up, and I'll try not to cut you off mid-sentence, but would ask you just to wrap up if you do see a red card. Thank you so much. We'll now begin with Ms. May Wong from Capital Power for your opening 5-minute statement.
Good afternoon, Chair, ladies and gentlemen, and honorable members of Standing Committee on Natural Resources. My name is May Wong. I'm the Senior Vice President of Strategy, Planning and Sustainability for Capital Power, and I'm joined by Daniel Georgiou, our VP Regulatory, Siting and Stakeholder Engagement for SMR. Capital Power appreciates the opportunity to appear before you and provide our perspective on Canada's electricity grid and network. We're a North American power producer headquartered in Edmonton, Alberta, and we currently operate over 9.2 gigawatt of capacity at 32 facilities across Canada and the US. Roughly half of this capacity is in Canada, where we operate facilities in Alberta, Ontario, BC, and employ more than 700 people. We have invested and continue to invest in a range of technologies to provide reliable, affordable, and clean power solutions to customers. These include our $1.35 billion Genesee Repowering Project in Alberta that is nearing completion, which has enabled us and Alberta to be off coal. We're also investing in efficient natural gas and batteries in Ontario and pursuing renewable energy developments across North America. We have established a goal of achieving net zero by 2045 and continue to actively explore and assess technologies such as CCS, SMS, SMRs. And we're committed to meaningful engagement in Indigenous communities and pursuing opportunities for economic participation in our existing and future developments. The focus of our remarks today will be to highlight what we believe are key considerations in developing the framework necessary to attract and sustain the scale investment in generation capacity to meet expected load growth, to achieve decarbonization for our grids, and to ensure continual reliability and affordability. We would note that on the outset, the central theme of our remarks, reliability, affordability, and respecting regional differences are also featured prominently in the Canada Electricity Advisory Council's final report that was released this week. Every province and territory is unique in the way that they have structured their operations, oversight, planning, and participation across the different components of the electricity systems. Two aspects of particular importance are that differences in natural resources across provinces have driven different supply mix to meet provincial demand and support affordable and competitive rates. They also present different opportunities and challenges for provinces for their pathways to decarbonization. Second, provincial systems vary in terms of how decisions are made regarding the timing and types of generation, additions or retirements, and how costs and risks of generation investment decisions are allocated. This is a fundamental distinction between Alberta's system relative to those in other provinces. Generation investments are made by a range of parties on an at-risk basis with no guarantee of a return on investment or backstop recovery by ratepayers. These differences in circumstances for the region needs to be recognized and respected as part of any review or path forward for Canada's electricity systems. They also highlight the need for collaboration between governments as well as industry, Indigenous communities, and other stakeholders to consider policies to advance decarbonization while ensuring reliable, affordable objectives for each provinces are maintained. The impressive volume and speed of renewable additions in the last few years have created challenges for system operators. This energy transition period is highlighting the importance of having a reliable source of power that can provide firm and dispatchable capacity over extended periods. This is why the combination of FlexGen technology, such as natural gas and energy storage, will continue to be critical in supporting our grid's reliability, as levels of renewable penetration will continue to increase until technologies such as long-duration storage, CCS, SMRs can be deployed at scale. We're now moving beyond energy transition and into energy expansion, as demand in data center and electric vehicles and broader electrification will drive even higher demand growth. So the need for additional reliable baseload and dispatchable capacity at all times and all hours will become even more critical. To meet longer-term decarbonization objectives, full portfolio and decarbonization technologies are needed. The components that we need for our approach is that policy and regulatory frameworks needs to enable, accelerates development and deployment of newer technologies, to provide clarity and certainty regarding future carbon pricing at the industrial level, appropriate support to mitigate cost challenges, and also the support needed for network infrastructure required. Projects in Canada will be competing in projects around the world. Therefore, we need to provide timely resolution and clarity for policy frameworks to provide the confidence and certainty to move forward. This concludes my opening remarks. Look forward to any questions honorable committee members may have. Thank you.
Thank you for your opening statement. We'll now go to Geothermal Canada, Ms. Catherine Hickson. You have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. I think what I bring to this table is not so much something specific about transmission, but it's kind of the forgotten resource, and that is the deep geothermal heat beneath our feet. This has been the Geothermal Canada was actually formed in 1974. This is our 50th year. So Canadians have been active globally in geothermal energy, but not in Canada. So why not? There are a number of reasons, but what I want to bring to the table today is really what geothermal energy is. It covers a spectrum of technologies, and that is those spectrum of technologies start with ground base. So this is shallow geothermal. These are heat pumps, and often you will hear somebody say, I have geothermal. It is most likely that they, in fact, have a ground base or a geo exchange system. We move to conventional geothermal, which is a deep extraction of brines naturally occurring in the subsurface, extracting that energy from them to produce power or thermal energy. What is working, there's a lot of research and development around today are what are called advanced systems or engineered systems. In fact, the engineered geothermal systems, the American government has invested approximately $300 million in the last 2 years in the advancement of engineered geothermal systems. As a note, there's over 16,000 megawatts of installed geothermal power globally. That doesn't sound like very much, but we have to remember that geothermal is base load, it is firm and dispatchable, and that 16,000 megawatts is equivalent to 5.5 billion megawatt hours annually. I want to make sort of 10 points about geothermal. It can help in Canada's decarbonization. It can provide baseload electricity as well as thermal energy. And I want to stress that these facilities do not require battery backup or storage, and they are grid stable and able to provide dispatchable power on a 24/7 basis. They provide a heat option for northern communities and allow for decarbonization without reverting to heat produced by electrical means. They provide a potential energy source for off-grid communities, indigenous, remote, and rural, as well as rural industry like mining operations. The geothermal energy systems can be used as part of a hybrid system combined with waste heat recovery, other forms of renewable energy such as solar and wind, and can help reduce the dependence of remote, rural, indigenous communities on hydrocarbons. Conventional deep geothermal facilities are carbon neutral, and work that I and my colleagues have been doing with the University of Alberta has shown that we can actually do carbon sequestration. So we can take a geothermal project and make it not just carbon neutral, but carbon negative by sequestering carbon that other emitters are producing. Although conventional geothermal has a high capex, it has a very low opex, and it is deployable in many parts of Canada. Unconventional or new generation geothermal, such as these advanced and engineered systems, potentially will have a higher cost, but these systems are under development, and as I've already said, the American government has invested more than $300 million in EGS systems. Geothermal can support food stability by producing locally grown and produced food. With additional research and testing, a small portion of the existing drilled wells, particularly the deep wells that have what's called a high water cut, it has some potential to, in fact, repurpose these wells to produce an energy stream, either as thermal or as electrical energy. And exploration and development of geothermal energy uses Canadian technology. This is something that we know how to do. We know how to drill. We know how to explore the deep subsurface. And in fact, that's the reason that Geothermal Canada has been around since 1974 is because Canadian expertise and technology has been deployed and being used globally but not here in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hickson, for your opening remarks. We'll now go to Mr. Dan Balaban from Greengate Power Corporation. You have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation to present to the committee today. Bon après-midi et merci pour l'invitation.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation to present to the committee today.
Apologies, I am getting a translation simultaneously, which is confusing. But I'm the co-founder and CEO of Greengate Power. Greengate is a renewable energy development company based in Calgary, Alberta, which has been behind some of the largest renewable energy projects in Canadian history. For background, though, perhaps I could share a bit of my professional story. I graduated with a computer science degree from the University of Toronto. I started my career in technology consulting, helping companies apply internet-based technology to solve business problems. In my mid-20s, I left consulting to start my own software company, which was an internet-based software solution for oil and gas. We successfully commercialized the software, and eventually it became an industry-leading solution. Amongst the many capabilities of the software was helping oil and gas companies track and report their greenhouse gas emissions during a time when greenhouse gas emissions were not nearly the issue that they are today. This gave me early insight into the looming environmental challenges I could see the energy industry facing. I had a successful exit from that company at the age of 30, and I knew the next business I wanted to start would be something that leaves a lasting positive environmental impact. With no prior experience in power, I started Greengate with my brother Jordan with our own capital more than 17 years ago. The goal was simple: to prove that large-scale renewable energy projects could work in Alberta, the heart of oil country. How hard could that be? Yet, Greengate has successfully developed over $2 billion of operating renewable energy projects in Alberta, representing about 1/3 of all the renewables in the province today. These projects produce enough energy to power more than 500,000 homes. This includes several of the largest wind projects in the country and the largest solar project in Canadian history, a nearly $1 billion project called Travers Solar. The projects we developed have secured power purchase agreements with Amazon and Microsoft. Multi-billion-dollar data center investments are now planned in the province, proving that a clean grid and new economic development opportunities go hand in hand. For the last 5 years, Alberta has been the leading destination for renewables investment in Canada and one of the top such destinations in North America. We have certainly proven what is possible and demonstrated to the world that Canada can lead in oil and gas and renewables. Unfortunately, energy in Canada has become highly politicized and polarized, with different political forces taking on high-profile opposing stances. This was recently demonstrated by Alberta's decision to impose a 7-month moratorium on new renewables projects in the province. This sent a profoundly negative signal throughout the industry. It was recently lifted, but the new rules and uncertainty coming out of the moratorium have put the future of the booming renewables industry in the province at risk. On one side, we have the federal government that is pushing the provinces, including my home province of Alberta, towards a very ambitious net zero grid by 2035 target. On the other hand, we have our provincial government that is pushing back very hard against that target, with the renewables industry caught in the crossfire. We need to be working on solutions that will be providing us the clean, affordable, and reliable energy we need to meet our future needs. The fight does not serve us. The world is going through an energy transition where we are moving from molecules to clean electrons as our primary source of energy. However, this transition will take time, and for the time being, we need all forms of energy to meet our quickly growing energy demands. The demand for electricity in particular is expected to increase rapidly, not only due to our growing population, but also due to the electrification of transportation and industry, as well as the rising demands from data centers and AI. As we move towards a net zero future, it is important to recognize the opportunities and challenges ahead. We have the triangle of clean, affordable, and reliable. Given the current state of technology, we can have 2 out of the 3 corners covered, but having all 3 corners covered remains elusive. This is why incentives such as the federal investment tax credits and the Smart Renewables and Electrification Pathways program are so vital to ensure that industry can attract the necessary capital to build out the energy infrastructure of the future. This includes technologies such as renewables, energy storage, and carbon capture. Now is the time to move past polarization, take on the challenge, and seize the opportunity ahead for all Canadians. Again, thank you for the invitation, and I look forward to a productive discussion. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Balaban, for your opening remarks. We'll now go to Western Copper and Gold, Mr. Paul West-Sells, and you have 5 minutes. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, for the invitation and honor to speak today. My name is Paul West-Sells. I'm the president of Western Copper and Gold. Our flagship project, the Casino Project, is one of Canada's largest and most significant critical minerals projects located in the Yukon Territory. I'm here to discuss the significant role our project plays in supporting the transition to a green economy and the development of a resilient and modern electricity grid. Over the life of the mine of the Casino Project, it's estimated to contribute $44.3 billion to Canada's GDP, create over 132,000 full-time equivalent jobs, and contribute $11.2 billion in taxes and royalties to various levels of government. The Casino Project will be a key contributor to Canada's supply of critical minerals essential for the green energy transition. With an anticipated lifespan of 27 years and the potential to extend for decades beyond, the project is expected to produce substantial quantities of copper and molybdenum, along with gold and silver. As you know, these minerals are crucial for the development of renewable energy technologies such as wind turbines, solar panels, and electric vehicles, aligning with Canada's goals for a more sustainable electricity grid. As the biggest mining development in the Yukon Territory, we're committed to ensuring the Casino project becomes a model of green copper production. To achieve this, we need access to a stable, reliable green power connection. This is why Western has been such a proponent of the BC Yukon Grid Interconnect. Simply put, the Yukon is running out of power. Every year, as the population grows, the territory is forced to tack on more diesel generators to meet increasing demand. In the winter, they just can't keep up. The BC Yukon Grid Interconnect represents not only a source of green power, but would bring reliability to the Yukon grid. The interconnect opens the opportunity for our project and for others to run on a reliable power source. It will strengthen our northern sovereignty and unlock future prosperity for our northern communities. The government of the Yukon Territory has already put in an application to begin doing the exploratory work on the Grid Interconnect through the Critical Minerals Infrastructure Fund. This would mean beginning work on the planning, site, and route selections and continuing engagement with Indigenous communities in BC and the Territory. We understand that any project of this size will take time, but every year that we wait, the costs grow higher and the demand for transmission grows higher. We need to start making tangible first steps towards making this project a reality. As it stands right now, because of the size of our project and the nature of the Yukon's grid, the Casino project is forecasting to spend $1.8 billion on the carbon tax over the life of mine. That is because to power the mine, we need to build and operate our own LNG power plant. In other parts of Canada, we would be able to connect to the grid power, but development of electrical grid in the Yukon has not kept up with demand and is not equipped to power the next wave of critical minerals projects such as our Casino project. We believe that if we are paying into the carbon tax, that the money should go towards projects that strengthen energy security for Yukoners. Canada's electricity grid and sector are a competitive advantage in the 21st century. As the nation transitions to green energy sources, projects like ours play a crucial role. Copper from the Casino project will support the modernization of grid infrastructure. We will be a reliable, ethical, sustainable source of critical minerals for manufacturers who use our critical minerals in transmission equipment, generators, and batteries. Canadian critical minerals are essential in friend-shoring our domestic industry, ensuring that Canada and its allies have access to the resources we need. The financial barriers to reaching net zero electricity by 2035 are significant. We recognize that. Our project contributes to this transition by attracting private sector investment. The Casino project's economic benefits, including job creation and regional development, are a generational opportunity for the Yukon and for the country. Canada's commitment to decarbonizing its electricity grid by 2035 and achieving a net zero economy by 2050 is a challenging yet necessary path. Our project exemplifies how private sector initiatives can support national decarbonization efforts, contributing to a cleaner electricity and reduced carbon footprints. Western Copper and Gold is proud to be at the forefront of supporting Canada's transition to a green economy through the Casino project. We are committed to contributing positively to the nation's electricity infrastructure, environmental goals, and Indigenous engagement strategies. Our role in providing critical minerals, supporting grid modernization, and fostering economic growth positions us as a key player in Canada's sustainable future. Thank you for the opportunity to share our vision and our commitment. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Westsells, for your opening remarks. Now we will proceed to our first round of questioning, and we'll begin with Mr. Patzer. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. We'll start with Western Copper and Gold. Just wondering, this Casino project, when did you guys start the initial process for it?
Start the process to get the project regulated, or start the process to... The Yukon government has started the process to look towards a grid intertie between British Columbia and the Yukon.
Right, but for the mines that you're talking about building, you're still in some of the permitting. You're doing feasibility studies and all that still. Am I right?
Yeah, so the project has a completed feasibility study from 2022. We're currently in the first stages of the regulatory process. So in the Yukon, that's called the YESA process. It's anticipated that it'll take approximately 4 years from today to get through that process, and then another 3 years of construction. So this is an early 2030 project.
Okay, and when it comes to all the applications, when was the first application submitted for, I guess, for your feasibility study, your ESAB applications? Like when was that all? When did it all start? Like permitting, when did it all start?
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of been a couple of fits and starts, but this current application with the current design from 2022, that application was establishment of the guidelines kicked off at the beginning of 2023. Those were reviewed. It went back and forth. Final guidelines were issued in September of 2023. So now essentially it's back to us to put together the application, which we will be doing over the next year.
So for trying to get to a net zero grid by 2035, to have a project like this not going to be producing until pretty much close to that date, what's that going to do for this target that the government has set to try to hit net zero by 2035?
I think that if we start, we're moving the project forward. You're looking at liquefied natural gas as our power source because it's the only option that's available to us. We would love for it to not be liquefied natural gas. We would love for it to be green power producing green copper. We will continue to advance our project through the regulatory process. We're hopeful that by the time we get through that regulatory process, that the concept of a grid intertie is sufficiently advanced that we can connect to that, or at worst, delay start of the project for a couple of years in order for us to connect to that grid that green power.
Can you tell us a little bit more about some of these delays, like what's happened, what's going on with those delays, like what's causing them?
Yeah, I mean, it's 2023 there was a number of delays with the regulatory process. It's really, I mean, the YESA process from a positive is that you have First Nation, federal, and territorial governments all working together on comments. The negative of that is that it does take a long time to get all those comments collected, and sometimes there are delays through that. And when we look at 2023 on the guidelines, really where we saw a lot of comments that were, potentially a little bit unnecessary or more detailed than they needed to be was actually of the federal government. The territorial and First Nation governments, the comments were as expected. The federal government comments were quite deep and really more not environmental assessment related comments, but permitting related comments, which is a subsequent project or process after environmental assessment.
Okay, so it sounds like there's going to be some duplication going on. Would that be correct?
Certainly with, the comments and heard from the territorial and federal government, there's duplication going on, absolutely.
Would it be helpful to have a streamlined process that would hopefully eliminate a lot of that duplication?
Absolutely, yeah. And, certainly encouraged by, what hearing from the federal government in terms of streamlining the process, but, excited to see what that actually means, particularly for northern locations such as the Yukon, which has got, somewhat unique regulatory process.
Yeah, absolutely. As we've had some similar comments from other witnesses and other studies as well, too. How might your experience in the Yukon compare to any proposed projects, maybe in a different province? Like, is there a difference between where you're located and if there's in one of the other provinces in the country?
I think one of the key differences, specific to what we're talking about here today, is that access to power. I mean, you've got an isolated grid in the Yukon that is completely over capacity at this point in time. So, You're looking at any mining projects, any additional mining projects that come on, either need to generate their own electricity or connect to a grid, which right now, the last megawatts that are being added are rental diesel generators. So essentially, you're continuing to develop. The Yukon is right now being developed on carbon-based power, and any future is looking at that at this point in time.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Brendan Hanley. Welcome to committee, Mr. Hanley. Great to have you. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, and I want to just thank my colleagues and committee members for allowing me to take a turn on this committee. I think this is a really important study to explore, develop, and build. And to me, electricity in the national grid should be looked at as a nation-building exercise. And I want to make sure that the northern perspective and northern needs and opportunities are included in this study. And so I will concentrate my questions with Mr. West-Sells, but I do want to just briefly first ask, and thank you to all of the witnesses, by the way, but Ms. Hickson, I'm really interested in your testimony, and I'm interested if you can comment on geothermal potential for Northern Canada. Of course, I'm particularly interested in the Yukon Territory. I know that there has been some activity there, but can you perhaps update me very briefly on geothermal energy in the north?
Yes, I would be happy to. Coincidentally, I've just been working with the Yukon government to develop a geothermal regulations. So I have global expertise. I've been in the geothermal industry for 43 years now, and have been actually working with not just the Yukon government, but also the government of Northwest Territories, and have also been working with the government of Nunavut. And yes, there is certainly Yukon has a better potential than Nunavut. The western part of Northwest Territories has very good potential as well. In the rest of mostly Nunavut and northern NWT, what we need to do is more research and development into these enhanced or engineered geothermal systems.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. Mr. West-Sells, so yeah, very good to see you. And we've had many conversations on this particular topic and others around the casino project. But you've discussed some of the unique features already of Yukon's energy grid as an isolated northern grid. But what do you see as the opportunities in connecting to BC and what I would like to phrase as really connecting to the national grid, and what specifically is the support that you think you need, particularly from at federal level?
Yes, thank you, MP Hanley, and it's good to see you again. Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously the opportunity that I'm presenting here is Canada's largest critical minerals mine, copper and molybdenum, for 27 years plus, a number of decades. I mean, could likely up to 100 years. So that's a large opportunity in and of itself. Behind us, there are a number of other critical minerals projects as well. But that isn't the only thing that we're talking about. I mean, since this idea has been floated, and it's been floated really at the territorial government level for the past year or so, there is opportunity in terms of generation that's been brought to my attention, particularly in northern British Columbia. There's been opportunity in terms of other northern British Columbia mining projects that would be opened up by this. I mean, this is essentially, the way I think about this is that one of the key things that opened up the Yukon was the Alaska Highway that was built around World War II. The next big highway that needs to be built is the electrical highway, and that electrical highway needs to go up into the Yukon.
Yeah, I think casino is a really interesting case study of the relationship between modern mining, critical mineral development, and then the need for the energy to support it. And at the same time, of course, critical mineral development is critical to support the energy transition. Can you talk about what your understanding is of where British Columbia is in pursuit of a BC-Yukon connection?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so it's my understanding that publicly that Premier Eby from British Columbia has put his support behind this. I believe that the application that was forwarded by the Yukon government into the Critical Minerals Infrastructure Fund includes a letter of support from Premier Eby. So at that political level, there's absolutely alignment on this. And like I said, this is not just about opening up the Yukon. It's about opening up northern British Columbia and the Yukon as well.
Yeah, great point. And I wonder if you can touch on, we've heard, of course, the presentation on the potential for geothermal. You've talked about, really the only choice apart from grid connectivity is LNG. But can you talk about the role of renewable technologies? And what about, either in the medium term, but maybe in the long term, if we really are looking at decades of mining potential, both at Casino and at other sites around the north?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of our regulatory application. We need to show the ability to, what potential there is for green energy. Those studies have been done. What we found is that there wasn't really a cost-effective opportunity for our mine specifically. It doesn't go to say that there isn't an opportunity if you expand the grid, look at a number of different opportunities around the area that can't be brought into the Yukon and add to the energy mix.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now go to Monsieur Simard for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, George. I'd like to verify something with Mr. Balaban of Greengate Power Corporation. Can you hear me okay? Is the interpretation working? Can you hear me? Thank you. In your presentation, you concluded by saying that unfortunately the renewable energies industry is suffering from political polarization. Certain politicians have a tendency to demonize those people who are associated with this necessary transition. We see this constantly here at the House of Commons. So I'd like to ask all the witnesses a question, and I'd like to hear what you have to say on this. If we really want to make this change to renewable energies, do you feel that the carbon tax is essential?
Would you like to begin with, Mr. Simard?
Par Monsieur Balaban, oui.
I'll begin with Mr. Balaban, please.
You touched on a point that I made, which is, the polarization around the energy discussion in this country. And, I'm not trying to point fingers at any one side, just to be clear in what I'm saying. I think it's polarized on both sides. On one side, we've got those that think we can make a very rapid transition to an all renewables system, which unfortunately is not technically feasible today. I think we can get more and more renewables, increase penetration over time, certainly, but to get to an all renewable system today is unrealistic. And then you have those on the other side that say renewables are unreliable and expensive and all sorts of false narratives there. But the truth is in the middle. And what we really need to be doing is we need to be working beyond these polarizing sorts of narratives and be working on the solutions that we need to get us to where we need to go. As far as the carbon tax goes, the industrial carbon tax, the industrial carbon regime that exists in Alberta specifically, has been very effective in terms of incentivizing the right sorts of developments in infrastructure in Alberta around renewables. The retail carbon tax, though, has not had a direct impact on the work that we are doing.
Peut-être avant de...
Before I ask the other witnesses question and ask them whether they're in agreement with carbon pricing, I'd like to reassure you, Mr. Balaban, I don't want to point and blame you, so please be assured about that. But I'd like to say to the committee that the action taken politically to promote investment in renewable energy, do you have any ideas about what the government could do to promote investment into renewable energy?
Is that a follow-on to me?
Oui, oui, tout à fait.
Yes, it is.
Well, okay, thank you. There's some policies that are being put forward right now and that are in place right now. The investment tax credits that were put forward are very critical to ensure the further build out of renewables technologies. It will ensure that Canada remains competitive with other global opportunities where capital can be deployed, specifically south of the border in the United States with their Inflation Reduction Act, which has been very good for investment. So, we need to respond, and we have done that with the investment tax credits. Things like the Smart Renewables and Electrification Pathways program, which has been deploying capital into various renewables projects across the country, has been very effective. Things like the Canada Growth, the Clean Growth Fund, the Canada Clean Growth Fund, which has been providing assurances for long-term carbon revenues, has been very effective. Some of the work that the Canadian Infrastructure Bank has been doing has been effective, and I think it's really a toolkit of things that we need to seize the opportunity, and it's important that we move relatively quickly on those opportunities so that we can remain globally competitive.
Merci. Je vais terminer.
Thank you. I will conclude very quickly by asking each of the witnesses to say whether they're in favor of carbon pricing in order to promote electrification. So very quickly, could you answer by a yes or a no?
Kathy Hickson, Geothermal Canada, yes.
Capital Power, yes.
Western Copper and Gold, no, because I have no other alternative than using carbon at this point in time.
Merci.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smart. We'll now go to Mr. Angus for 6 minutes. Mr. Angus, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our witnesses. This is a fascinating discussion. I want to begin with you, Madame Wong, because you represent a company that has enormous expertise in power and diversified power. And I'm interested because recently you walked away from the Genesee project near Edmonton, and that was a big $2.4 billion carbon capture project. And that really took everyone, I think, a bit by surprise. And some analysts suggested that you guys walked away because of financial and technical uncertainty about the project. Could you explain why the Genesee project was shelved?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to pass this question to be answered by my colleague, Daniel Viryu.
Thank you, May. And Mr. Chair, I assume it's okay for me to proceed?
Yes, proceed.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the Genesee announcement, that, as we stated publicly at the time of the announcement, that was there were two parts to it. We had completed a front-end engineering and design study, that did confirm the technology was viable and practical in the mode of operations that we were envisioning. But at this time, it was just not economically viable, taking into account a number of considerations. So the decision was made to stand down on it for this time, but we did also state, and we stand by, that we would definitely reassess it if economic circumstances and conditions change, and that relates to things such as the costs of the technology itself, and commodity pricing and other factors. So that was.
Thank you for that. I'm interested because I was reading the Business Council of Alberta had said they raised serious questions about the Canadian Energy Regulator's performance standard for CCS, and they said that technologically it is, quote, currently unachievable. And that report was done before the Genesee project was mothballed. So do you think the Business Council of Alberta is wrong in saying that the technology is currently unachievable at the rate that it's needed and required for CCS?
I haven't seen the Business Council report, but in terms of, I think there's the technical work we did, identified the attainable or the expected level of performance of the technology given the mode of operations. In the context of the discussions with that are underway regarding the clean electricity standards, there is a discussion of whether the assumed standard that would be included in that reflects the capability of the technology. So that may have been what the report was referring to, but there's a distinction between what the vendors have assured us that the technology can achieve and what may or may not be reflected in any regulations.
The regulation is a 95% containment, which there have been complaints that that's not technologically feasible. I guess my concern is that the CER says that in order to meet our targets, there's going to have to be a 39 times increase in CCS from current levels. So if it's not financially feasible, and you guys have crunched the math, you guys are forefront in terms of power generation. If it's not feasible for you, what's it going to take? Are you looking at, is it going to have to be public subsidies to make CCS work, or is it financially just not doable?
At this time, it's not viable given the existing current cost, or commodity cost outlook, and the suite of support mechanisms that are in place.
So, because we're told, certainly our friends in the Liberals keep telling us that this thing is going to take off, it's going to deal with it, but you're dealing with it from a practical point of view. You say you've looked at the technology, you've got a big project. This was $2.4 billion near Edmonton, but you're saying it's not financially feasible. So would you make suggestions for what, more public money to operate these plants, or is it just not doable?
I'd note that it just reflected the economics for our project at this time. CCS and other sectors faces different cost considerations, and I can't speculate on what may or may not work for other projects at different sizes.
Because your natural gas plant, right? Wasn't it a natural gas plant?
We were proposing to put the carbon capture unit on the back end of the two new combined cycle units that we're nearing completion of at Genesee, and as Ms. Wong noted.
Okay, I guess my concern is that this would be hugely beneficial for continuing to use natural gas because it's coming under a lot of pressure for its fossil fuel use. So if we had a new plant that had natural gas that we could capture 95%, that would make a huge difference in being able to sell that to the public. But if there's no financial case, then we're going to have to look at other options, are we not?
It's not economic today, but we are looking. Yes, we will need to look at other options in any event because the CCS, small modular reactors, hydrogen, geothermal, we think they all have a role and they all provide that zero emitting dispatchable power markets need. So there's still we think a pathway to CCS in the future, but we also do need to advance other technologies as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now go to our second round of questioning, and we will begin with Mr. Falk for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses that have provided testimony for us here today. Ms. Hickson, I'd like to ask you some questions about geothermal a little bit. I actually am a fan of geothermal. I have several buildings with geothermal in it, and when it works well. When it doesn't, it's expensive. But can you tell me how, when it comes to electricity generation with geothermal, what does it cost per kilowatt hour compare to with other forms of electrical generation?
So the cost for electrical generation, it depends on where you are. In Canada, it is currently quite high simply because of the development costs. But if we go globally and look at other resources, it can be very low, in the $40 to $50 per megawatt hour. And if we look actually at what is being done in the United States, their stated goal for the work, for the investment they are making in engineered geothermal systems is to create power at $45 per megawatt hour.
And how would that compare to hydroelectricity or gas turbine electricity?
So this is higher than gas. But what we bring to the table is the fact that, so I don't want to argue that geothermal is better than natural gas. What I want to point out is that geothermal, if we're producing power from it or using it for thermal energy, can actually offset that natural gas. And as an Albertan, that natural gas can be sold much more profitably offshore. Hopefully with the new pipelines that are going to get it there. And it can help other countries actually reduce their carbon footprint. Where I think geothermal has a significant role to play is actually an offset in essentially liberating that natural gas to go to other markets where it can be used to reduce their greenhouse gas production.
Okay, good. Thank you. And is it feasible in today's environment to actually construct a geothermal electricity generating plant in Canada? Like, what are the roadblocks?
So we're talking about conventional geothermal, and the roadblocks are financial, convincing capital to be deployed within geothermal. That's a huge problem. The federal government has been deploying capital into projects. There are 3 electrical generation projects that have been supported by the Emerging Renewable Energy Program. And those are DEEP in Saskatchewan, Alberta No. 1 in Alberta. I happen to be the CEO of that one, and a project called Tutica in British Columbia. But when I was asked the question about the carbon tax, if we look at Alberta No. 1, our financial model is built on 3 pillars. One of them is carbon taxes. One is the sale of thermal energy, and the other is the sale of electricity. Currently, we have to price that sale of thermal energy at a discount to natural gas. This makes geothermal very difficult in terms of competition with natural gas and other forms of electrical generation.
Okay.
If we're talking about this new generation, advanced and engineered geothermal systems, these are right now very, very costly. But I want to focus on conventional geothermal.
I have limited time here, Ms. Hickson, so I'm going to have to move on because I do want to ask Mr. Balaban a question as well. Mr. Balaban, you're quite involved in setting up green energy solutions. Can you tell me your experience with connecting to the grid? Does it work? Are there any obstacles in doing that? Do we have capacity for the extra generation that you can provide?
That's a good question. Connecting to the grid is a very complicated process. I can speak from my experience developing projects in Alberta. It's a well-regulated process, but it takes several years to get through. It's very costly. But I think what we are starting to see now in Alberta, and it's not just here, it's in many places across Canada and around the world, in fact, is grid constraints, where the grid can't keep up with all the new power generation that is requested. And that is a challenge facing the growth of the industry.
Thank you. We'll now go to Ms. Lapointe for 5 minutes. Ms. Lapointe.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Mr. Balaban. Your organization has developed several solar power projects, and you had been working on the Midnight Solar project, but it's my understanding that you have since sold the project. But I do have some questions surrounding the technology. And we're talking about a project with battery storage component that is capable of providing power to the grid at peak times and hours, even during periods of no sunlight. And at times, this committee has heard critics say that solar power is unreliable and is not well suited for Canada's cold climate. Can you, in your opinion, will battery storage projects of this magnitude help to make solar power better suited to our climate?
Well, first I'd respond that solar is very reliable and very well suited for our northern climate. The challenge with solar is that it only produces when the sun shines, but it very reliably so during those conditions. So what we need batteries for battery storage is to extend the operating hours for renewables projects to produce stored energy when the sun doesn't shine, for example. There's different types of storage technologies that are vying for helping to solve the market problem or the market issue that exists. Battery storage is one of them. Batteries typically have a relatively short duration where they can store energy economically for 2 to 4 hours. There's other technologies that are not yet as mature that are trying to provide storage solutions for longer, for 8, 12, possibly even longer. But I think it's really important to look at the energy system as a mix. There's a mix of solutions, a mix of power generation technologies that we require. There's no one solution alone that's going to meet all our needs, but certainly the combination of renewables, which is primarily solar and wind today, with battery storage is something that is looking very promising, assuming the regulatory framework is in place to accommodate it.
Okay. In your opinion, what are the main challenges or obstacles that Greengate faces in scaling up wind and solar power capacity in Canada? And what do you need to see from the different levels of government to overcome these challenges?
Well, I'd say as of late, the biggest challenge that our industry is facing is the extreme polarization around energy that I'd referred to in my opening comments. What that fight is doing is creating a lot of regulatory and market uncertainty at the moment in Alberta, and that has significantly slowed down investments because in order for investors to make a significant long-term investment in something like a renewables project, which typically has an operating life of 30 or more years, there needs to be a long-term certainty around what the revenue stream will look like. And while that is up in the air, it's difficult to make those long-term investment decisions. So, I think it's really trying to move beyond the polarization on this issue and work on solutions. So solutions that are very important are some of the federal incentives that have been talked about that I mentioned, the investment tax credits, some of the other programs, looking at collaboration around national grid and connecting more of our provinces. Alberta, for example, is relatively relatively isolated compared to its neighbors, and I think that's a problem that exists across the country. No reason we shouldn't be connecting the western provinces so that hydro and in BC and Manitoba, for example, could be used to supply and clean up the grid in Alberta and Saskatchewan, which typically have relied on fossil fuels for generation. Just certainty to the extent that we can, and trying to work together collaboratively.
I have about 1 more minute left, so I'm going to ask you very quickly, just so we really understand what's on the line here when you talk about that polarization. Can you tell us can you speak to the socioeconomic benefits of Greengate's renewable energy projects, such as job creation, community engagement, and economic development?
Mr. Balaban, I'll ask you to be just very quick because we are out of time. 10 seconds, please.
Local jobs, over 1,000 jobs created, during construction for a project like Travers, millions of dollars a year in municipal tax revenues, and a clean source of energy for future generations.
Thank you. Monsieur Simard, you have 2.5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Merci.
Thank you. I'm a gentleman, so I let Shirley ask the question, but I have a question for Capital Power. I have some questions about the fact that you have abandoned the CCS project of $2.4 billion, and I'd like to know, when you talked about the various generating stations you have, these stations, are they based on gas?
So the generation next we have are natural gas and solar renewables as well in our portfolio. And in terms of the CCS project, while we have discontinued the Genesee CCS project due to economic reasons, we continue to look at other opportunities to deploy not just CCS, but other decarbonization technologies and clean power, such as SMRs.
Merci. J'aimerais.
Thank you. I don't know if you have any idea of the cost by kilowatt hour. I'd like to know, if you're able, for you to provide us or provide the committee with the costs associated for kilowatt hours for wind versus a kilowatt hour for a natural gas generation with a carbon storage strategy. Is that something that you could provide to the committee?
And I can speak to that at a high level, that the costs of renewables such as wind and solar on the energy basis that is before firming is lower than natural gas, cost of natural gas generation. However, when factoring into holistic costs of delivering that energy on a firm basis, so in order to be dispatchable and provided in all hours, that costs significantly increase in terms of firming up the dispatchable resources like solar and natural gas.
Merci.
Thank you. I understand. But could you provide the committee with a document that breaks down the various costs? That could be very helpful to us. Thank you.
Thank you. And that is a reminder for everyone. We still have a number of folks to go through in the rounds, but you can provide a brief if anything is missed or asked for post-meeting to the clerk. And we'll now proceed to Mr. Angus for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. Ms. Hickson, I would like to speak with you about the potential. You were saying 16,000 megawatts internationally. Canada doesn't seem to be really on the map in terms of geothermal. And yet what I find surprising is I would think we'd have enormous resources. I see that the old Spring Hill mine caused such a disaster, human disaster, is being refitted for geothermal. In my little town of Cobalt, I have at least 6 abandoned shafts on the hill behind my house. We have 100 at least in the surrounding bush, in Timmins, we've got shafts that go down 5, 6, 8,000 feet into very, very hot water because the shafts have filled up. Is that potential for using geothermal from the mine infrastructure that we have that's from closed operations?
Yes, absolutely. And another one is in Yellowknife, where there are 2 deep mine shafts. So these are geothermal projects that are ripe for the picking. They're not being picked because you cannot make the finances work. Why can't you make the finances work is a lot of it has to do with that upfront high capex that I was speaking about. And investors, essentially, what geothermal is against is providing that thermal energy through natural gas. And when I answered the question about the carbon credit, it really is about that. Is geothermal cannot compete against natural gas without that added bonus of the carbon, essentially a carbon credit.
Okay,
is
so
what a geothermal project.
I got a very short time here. So you're saying that, for example, the old McIntyre number 11 shaft that my grandfather worked on, that's 6,000 feet deep, full of hot water. We can't just stick a pipe down and doing heat transfer. Like, that's the technology they tell me they can use at my house if I get a heat pump. Why are the upfront costs so high to make something like that doable?
Because we're competing with natural gas. And my guess is, I do not know the specifics of that, but your community probably already has natural gas pipelines in place. So what we have to do is we have to build a district heating system as well as recovering that heat. That's where the cost comes in.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Dreeshen for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all of the witnesses. It's some very interesting discussions that we're having this afternoon. First of all, to Ms. Wong with Capital Power, you had spoken about the holistic costs of delivery and so on, and of course, of energy. But of course, in Alberta, most of the natural gas is out to every farm and is out to all the communities. So that network is already there. I think it's critical when we talk about projects, that are already in the ground. I mean, we have the same scenario for other provinces as they've developed their system, and and we're happy for them. We do seem to have a little bit of a concern, though, when we continue on our natural gas journey. One of the other things, and Mr. Simard mentioned this, is a cost breakdown, and that's something that I would like all of the energy producers that we're talking to today to kind of give some thought to, and maybe you can give us this information. But there is a cost to all aspects of a project. And I've always said that if we can measure the commitment, the greenhouse gas emissions, and so on, and whatever it is you have to use in order to start from the first shovel you use to dig something up to the last shovel you have to use to cover it up, I think that's really important. So yes, we have the use of it and the length of time that you're going to run a project. All of those things are important, but to also make sure that you analyze all of the environmental aspects of this, because it's the environment that we're really dealing with. The greenhouse gas aspect is a thing that seems everybody wants to focus on, but it's the environment that we're concerned about. So I'm curious if we could look at that. So first of all, perhaps Ms. Wong, do you have those types of numbers available from the, as I say, from the full life cycle for the projects that you're engaged in?
So for some of the projects, we have some of the costs that are in the entire ecosystem. Some of the challenge in being able to quantify the holistic cost is that there is information that is not always available and also consistency to be able to holistically look at the life cycle from an end-to-end basis. But many pieces of the value chain and the consideration on risk and opportunity is part of the assessment in terms of an investment process that we look at.
Thank you very much. And perhaps, Mr. Balaban, to you as well, because you're primarily speaking with the renewables that we already have in Alberta. Do you have those metrics available for the different types of projects that you work with?
I don't, unfortunately, have them available at my fingertips.
Okay, well, thanks. And and then let me go to Ms. Hickson then, because when we're dealing with geothermal, I think you've been talking about the actual costs. So so that part you've been dealing with. It's the distribution and transmission after that. Do you have any figures that you could share?
In what aspect? In terms of the total project investment?
Basically, but not just the investment, but the actual types of work that is required in order to drill the shafts, to do all of this other type of thing. What are you using? What energy sources are you using to make sure that this works? And if a project has to be decommissioned, what the costs are associated with that?
So geothermal has a very low decommissioning cost. Because it's not a pollutant in the same way that hydrocarbons, so we don't have that orphaned well issue that you do with oil and gas wells, or suspended wells and abandoned wells. In terms of, maybe the best thing is the Alberta No. 1 project. We started that project in 2017. We are not able to move that project forward because we have not been able to get the capital investment that we need. Where are our target in terms of the cost of power? What we would like is a power purchase agreement at $75 per megawatt hour. Currently on the Alberta grid, the price of power is significantly lower than that, and so that project is not yet economic.
Okay. Well, back perhaps to Mr. Balaban. You had spoken about the moratorium that had taken place in Alberta, and of course it was there to establish consistent legislative and regulatory environment. You said that caused grief because you had projects that are on the way, but were you part of the discussion? It says that they had interested stakeholders meeting with the government. Is that part of it? Because certainly in that reclamation, security, these were the things that we were hearing on the ground that farmers wanted to know about and wanted that sort of assuredness. Did you meet with the provincial government?
Yes, I've discussed some of my concerns, but just to be clear, I had no concerns with any of the specific things that were being evaluated. I think that in the context of a fast-growing industry, that makes sense, but the moratorium was unnecessary.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Jawari for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to all our witnesses. Madam Hickson, I'm going to come back to you. I was looking at the submission that was made to the committee from Geothermal Canada, which titled Deep Geothermal Energy in Canada. On paragraph number 2, it is said, and I quote, deployment of the various type of geothermal system in the spectrum is dependent on the local geological conditions, population, industrial requirement, decarbonization targets, and other factors. Can you explain to us, you've talked about the spectrum, and I think you talked about 3 different technologies, and you talked about some of the recent one, but can you expand on that one? Because it's very interesting, and the way I read it is that, well, we could implement geothermal depending on where in the jurisdiction, province by province, we can go and do the analysis and recommend what type of geothermal we can. But you also highlighted in here population, industrial requirement, decarbonization target. Can you expand on those, why these are required?
So they're required because of that high capex. So geothermal projects, unlike wind and solar, have a high capex, and the investment that you get on, so the return on your investment is Our financial modeling for Alberta number 1 puts our return on investment at about 10 to 15% in that 8 to 10 year time frame. The problem with that is that we are competing directly with natural gas, or not natural gas, sorry, we are competing with investors who are putting their money into hydrocarbons. And those hydrocarbon investments will pay significantly better ROIs than a geothermal project. So why I have, in terms of, there needs to be a population that needs the power or needs the thermal energy. And I already mentioned, answering the other gentleman, is that it's not just putting a heat exchanger down into a well. We have to actually, particularly in the case of thermal energy, we have to build a district energy system. Those district energy systems, because we're talking about digging up the ground, are expensive, and we are again competing in many localities across Canada with already built infrastructure that is based on natural gas. So the best place to put in geothermal is in new development, where we can build that thermal energy requirement or extraction into a new facility.
Okay, great. Can you give us a sense of, yeah, that was great. Can you give us a sense of the size of the CapEx that's needed? Also, in your 10 points that you highlighted, number 7, you were saying that although they have a high CapEx, it's a very low OPEX. Can you also give us a sense how much is that OPEX is compared to others? So the size of the CapEx and the size of the OPEX as compared to the others.
I can't give you exact figures, but what I can say is I was involved in the project with the city of Regina. So they have put forward for a geothermal project to heat. So this is thermal energy only, no power, to heat a very large aquatic center. And it probably doesn't mean much to you, but the geothermal system was to provide 22.7 million BTUs per hour for that aquatic center. The capital cost of that was $25 million. On the flip side, our Alberta number 1 project, we are looking at an investment of $100 million, and but that is to provide over 83,000 megawatt hours per year of energy, and that is equivalent. So that 83,000 megawatt hours per year is equivalent to basically 70 megawatts of solar, or about 30 megawatts of wind. To produce that same amount of megawatt hours, and that's not without so the other piece in terms of the financial is that for the geothermal project, we don't need that battery backup or those peaker natural gas. We are firm and can feed directly to the grid.
Yeah, I only got about 10 seconds. Can you tell me about the OPEX? You're saying the OPEX is very low. Do you have any numbers around the OPEX?
Not specifically from Canada, because we have no operating electrical plants.
From anywhere?
Yes. So the OPEX in terms of, I don't know how to phrase it. 10% of your total costs per year.
Sure.
Thank you. Now we are in our final round. Colleagues, I propose we do 5-5, 2.5, 2.5, and then we'll end after that. That should take us pretty close to the end of the meeting. Mr. Patzer, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Wong, I was just wondering if you're going to be tabling a document to this committee about the cost per kilowatt hour for wind, solar, and natural gas. I'm just wondering if you would be able to also include in that a breakdown of if there was not a federal government imposed carbon tax on natural gas, what the cost would be as well if that wasn't there, just so that way we can get a good snapshot of all things being equal. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm just going to give notice of a motion quick with part of my time here. Given that the Liberal government released its internal economic data on the carbon tax, revealing it costs Canadians $30.5 billion and over $1,800 for every household in Canada, This is in addition to the increased cost the carbon tax puts on gas, groceries, and home heating, and the Liberal government tried to cover up this information from Canadians. When the parliamentary budget officer revealed that the Liberal government had this data, they placed him under a gag order and attempted to disparage his reputation. The committee report to the House that the Environment Minister must resign immediately. So I'm just giving notice of that motion. I'm not asking to move it or debate it, but just putting that out there. But, you know, I think it's just because we are talking about costs of energy here, I do think it ties in quite nicely with some of the points that we've heard here today. For Capital Power, I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit more about some of the obstacles or maybe disincentives that exist for you guys trying to get your project up and going, the carbon capture project.
Sure. I think one of the challenges with these newer technology is the scale of investment required and the level of uncertainty that exists in terms of certainty on longer term trajectory on industrial carbon pricing, and also there is increased risk on technology given where they're at in their cycle of development. So whether it's first of its kind or one of the more immature technologies, those are all factoring into our consideration when we're looking at whether there is too much risk to take on in order to proceed with the investment.
I'm just going to go to Greengate Power here. Mr. Balaban, just wondering, have you done any calculations on, in order to be net zero by 2035, how much or how many wind turbines would have to be built and operational from today to 2035 in order to be net zero?
I don't have that specific calculation, but I would acknowledge that for a province like Alberta, getting to net zero by 2035 is uniquely challenging.
And why is that? Because they would have to replace more coal and natural gas with wind, or what?
I think this is part of the polarizing discussion that I'm referring to. We can see significantly more renewables on the grid as time goes on, but net zero as an absolute goal is very challenging. In the case of Alberta, we don't have hydro resources like many other provinces. We rely a lot on thermal generation. Used to be coal, now it's natural gas, and a lot more renewables. But to take that thermal generation out of the mix and replace it entirely with renewables is not technically feasible at this time.
Okay, so you'd probably be willing to say that a 2035 target is that mandate is completely unrealistic.
Very challenging for Alberta, and I think it certainly requires some acknowledgement of the specific conditions and easing of some of the particular parts of it to apply to Alberta.
Yeah, and I think across the entire country as well too, because next door in Saskatchewan we're kind of in that same boat, same situation there. In regards to the interties, though, like this past winter, for example, Saskatchewan had to come to the rescue of Alberta there in January. Some of the new proposed CERs are creating some hesitancy about whether or not provinces would be able to share power back and forth smoothly. Do you have that same concern?
Well, I think we should look at this as a national problem and remove any barriers that might exist between the provinces to try to solve this together.
Thank you. We'll now move to Mr. Bruson for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I had a few questions, actually. Just it's kind of an interesting place to be the final person, because I kind of get to pick up on threads that I've been hearing in testimony until now. And I've heard, and maybe I'll start with Greengate, but I was actually hoping to go around to everyone. You had talked about the Infrastructure Bank, SREPs, and ITCs being very, useful and supportive to building out renewables as part of our energy mix. Can you tell me if you have seen any of these programs support projects that you're working on or that you have been adjacent to in your work?
A project we developed called Jurassic Solar, which we no longer own, but signed a contribution agreement for SREP funding.
Perfect, great. And if I can actually go to the others, maybe starting with Capital Power. So there.
Yes, sorry. Yes, these programs, we have been in conversation in terms of looking for ways to advance some of our projects.
And if I can ask, would that be through the Infrastructure Bank or SREPs, or is there another federal program that's been supportive?
The programs that you had mentioned are the ones that through SIF and CIBR, the conversations that we have had on our Genesee project.
Thank you. And what about for geothermal?
The predecessor to SREPs, the Emerging Renewable Power Program. But I also wanted to add that internationally in other countries, there is no need to subsidize geothermal. It is only in Canada.
I was just trying to figure out about the federal programs because it had come up through some of the other witnesses, so that was basically where I was going. But maybe with you, because one of the questions
have been very good.
Which was okay, perfect, thanks. One of the questions I had, it had come up last time we had testimony, was about the need to build to anticipate electrical through, for example, building codes. That was one of the witnesses had testified that would be helpful in promoting a cleaner grid. I just don't know if any of you have any thoughts about that. I can start with Greengate just to do the circle again.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
The idea that if building codes and the like would encourage building new to anticipate that we'd be moving to electrical, as opposed to building on older technologies.
Well, I think certainly things that we're seeing, like heat pumps, for example, are more efficient ways of heating and drive more electrical demand. But that only makes sense if our electricity comes from clean sources. But things like that certainly drive more demand for renewables.
Okay. I don't know if any of the others, if we were going to go through again with Capital Power, geothermal, if you have any thoughts about that, about building codes and building new buildings with the anticipation of moving to electrical.
Yeah, I would second the comment from Greengate that it's helpful to have more certainty and understanding the need for power going forward and the way that we can then plan forward to provide solutions that are affordable, reliable, and also looking for ways for clean power. But that alone would not be sufficient.
No, I'm just adding it as one of the things that had come up in the last time we had testimony. Geothermal, perhaps, is my last on that?
Yes, GeoExchange, systems that are actually using the produced heat and then storing that in the subsurface. Basically, every Canadian home and business should be using GeoExchange, shallow subsurface heat recovery and storage.
Love that you mentioned it, because the University of Toronto just moved to a large GeoExchange system that's a district energy system that actually helps to support the City of Toronto as well. So always glad to cheer that on. I think that brings me to the end of my time, though.
Thank you, Mr. Brusson. We'll now go to Monsieur Simard for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, merci, Georges.
Thank you, George. I'm not as familiar with the reality of electricity producing centrals in other provinces other side Quebec, but the law that was tabled to allow producers to have clean energy that are associated with businesses. I'm saying this because I know that some businesses are looking for clean energy sources, and I'd like to know from Capital Power and also from you, Mr. Balaban, if you have ever been approached by businesses that consume a lot of energy and want to develop clean energy projects, specifically clean energy projects.
Well, in the case of my company, we've had projects that we've developed that have entered into long-term agreements with Amazon and Microsoft. So, you know, those players are in the market, in the Alberta market. Yeah, it seems to be, you know, a number of companies all over the world that are, you know, making very strong renewable commitments and have come to Canada and Alberta specifically to source that type of power. In Alberta, it's because it's the only deregulated power market in the country and the only market where those sorts of bilateral arrangements are currently possible.
Merci. J'aurais la même.
Thank you. I have the same question for Capital Power.
Yes, we do have customers, large C&I customers that have interest to look for ways to have clean energy. We have virtual PPA customers for renewable projects, and we also have interest on energy, looking for energy for new demand like data centers and other industrial processes.
Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Angus for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Balaban, I've spoken with lots of people over the years on the clean energy file, and I was told many, many times that there was no jurisdiction as ready to kick off the clean energy revolution as Alberta, given the enormous potential solar, wind, but also the expertise. Would you agree?
I agree. I think, and I think we've seen that over the last you know, number of years. Alberta has been the leading province in the country for renewables growth.
Thank you for that, because, and you talked about like political polarization and the damage it's doing. I certainly see from the moratorium. I've talked again to businesses who said they're not going to go where they don't know if there's a climate that would support it. And yet I look at California that went from 770 megawatts of clean energy in 2019 to over 10,379 megawatts in 5 years. Texas is even more impressive, and I don't know if I'm stepping over the line here, but I'd say Texas has got even more right-wing politicians than the UCP, and yet on any given day, Texas with clean energy can generate over half the power that is produced across Canada. So would you say that Alberta is losing out from these battles? And would it be possible, given what we're seeing in jurisdictions like California and Texas, that's political will that gets us to those enormous amounts of clean energy. If we had political will, could Alberta and could the West compete with competitors like California and Texas?
Absolutely. I mean, up until recently, we were competing. Alberta, like I said, was one of the leading jurisdictions in North America for renewables investment. We've got and then unfortunately, you know, the moratorium has introduced a lot of uncertainty, and you know, folks are now waiting for that to unfold. But in fairness,
I just have to end here, but could I just ask you one more thing, because I'm running out of time here. The one thing I would ask your opinion of, for my time in Alberta, I find that we have enormously skilled workers, the union workers I've spoken to at IBEW, the building trades, carpenters unions, who have all spoken about their willingness to participate. If we can get this ideological hex off clean energy in Alberta, are there going to be good paying jobs and sustainable jobs from the projects that you're supporting?
Yeah, there's a lot of construction jobs that could be created with a massive build out of renewables, but we need all forms of energy oil and gas, and renewables.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Balaban. Thank you to all of our witnesses for joining us today and providing your testimony. As a reminder, if you would like to provide the committee an additional brief, please send that over to our committee clerk. Thank you so much. Have a great day. And I believe it's the will of the committee to adjourn. Everybody's in favor, so we will adjourn. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.